Hello, all of my patriots again. Welcome back to AP Gov. We're going to be going over chapter 2, the first half of it today. We're going to be talking about the formation of our country, 1776. Yeah. So we are going to cover the articles, the Constitution, and basically what it took to get actually ratified. But we're going to talk about the articles first. Now, I want you to think about this. I don't know if you guys remember this from American history or not. But the Articles of Confederation are our first form of government, and I want you to think of one word when you think of the Articles. They were weak, okay? They were weak sauce. They weren't any good. They were a system that just absolutely failed, and we're going to be going over that. So, who helped create this country? We got in the war, we won because we're the best, and we became a new country. How the heck are we going to run this thing? Well, James Madison's like, I've got great ideas. I can totally do this. Let's create a republic. Okay, that's fine. That's government ruled by representatives. That's totally understandable. And we're going to create our Constitution, which is a document that's going to structure our government. So they did. Oh, look at James Madison. He was a little guy. He was 5'4", 110 pounds soaking wet. But I digress. So anyway, he's like, we're going to make this thing called the Articles of Confederation. So it was this first form of government. And I'm not kidding you. I can't make this stuff up. They literally called themselves the League of Friendship. The League of Friendship. It's written in there. You're going to see it when you read it. It's a very short document. And a confederacy is where the vast majority of the power lies with the state and local governments. The national government has very, very little power. And they call themselves states. You need to understand that states are actually countries. France is a state, Norway's a state, Spain's a state. But that's what they did. They saw themselves as little countries. I mean, we're really provinces. Illinois is like a province. South Carolina is a province. But they saw themselves as little countries because they wanted to just do their own thing. But they were in the League of Friendship in case anyone ever came to attack them. So this My Little Pony League of Friendship that they had did not work out very well. They had very little power at the national level. There was no president. There was no Supreme Court, no national judiciary in any way, shape, or form. They had one representative per member of each state. So there were 13 members in Congress. Each of them got one vote. It was unicameral, one house legislature. Like I said, no president, no judiciary. They couldn't tax. They couldn't control trade. It was weak sauce, like I said. And they just wanted to avoid tyranny. Now, here are the articles. You're going to read those later, so you can check them out later. They had currency that was like all over the place. So here's an example of the continental currency in 1779 during the war. And it was like totally devalued, and it made us go into like a very deep depression, especially after the war when we owed people so much money. Since the national government couldn't tax, they had really no power to do anything. It was not working well. And then finally, James Madison's like, maybe we should like fix this. So he threw this party in Annapolis, Maryland in 1786. And he's like, hey guys, hey founding fathers, come join me at my party. It's going to be super fun. Let's talk about the articles and see what we can do to tweak them. And no one showed up. Like 12 people showed up to his party when he needed like everybody from every state. And they're like, nah, they didn't show up. So little James Madison, little guy, was bummed. And he's like, okay, maybe we should we really need to meet, like isn't just a party, like legit need to meet. So they're going to meet in May of 1787. But in between then, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back of them realizing that articles was weak sauce. There was Shays' Rebellion, where a bunch of farmers were mad that they were getting taxed, so they went to attack the Massachusetts State House. And the Massachusetts State House was like, what do we do? What do we do? There's a rebellion. So they call up the national government. They're like, hey, help us, please. And the national government's like, we really don't exist, so good luck with that. So now people are like, okay, we need something stronger at the national level. Yeah, it was pretty bad. There it is, State House in Maryland. I'm sorry, that's the State House in Maryland. That's the one that James Madison had tried to have his first party at, and it didn't work. Another problem with the articles, they didn't have hard money, which is like money that has actual value. And like I said, since they couldn't pay their debts, it was a major problem. Shays Rebellion, this is what caused them to change. So, skipping over this, I want to ask you guys this question. Why would some Americans worry about replacing the Articles of Confederation, even though most people believed it was ineffective? So, like, why would people freak out that it's being replaced when people know it sucks? And it's just really human nature. Humans don't like change, and they're worried that if this sucked, I'm guessing the next thing's going to be even worse. So we did see some fear with that, but remember, what replaced the Articles of Confederation, our first form of government, was the new Constitution that still exists today. So it was pretty good. Skipping this for now because I'll have you guys do stuff later. We're going to now talk about the Constitutional Convention. So remember how I said James Madison, no one came to his party? Well, now they're starting to come to his party. So they meet in Philadelphia. 55 delegates come. So it's much better numbers. We're still missing a state, but that's all right. We're finally getting together to see what we can do with the Articles of Confederation. So who are the big top dogs there? Well, James Madison, he is considered the father of the Constitution. If anyone wrote this document, you give him the credit for it. George Washington, of course, he becomes president of the United States, but he was also the president of convention. People love him. They realize that was a good pick. They know who he is. It makes people more comfortable when they're kind of nervous about them getting rid of these articles. And then Alexander Hamilton was the lead proponent of making a strong national government. And that's the exact opposite of what the Articles of Confederation were anyway. So he was one of the big leaders on making the national government more powerful. Who was there? Rich white men, pretty much. Here's the convention. There's George Washington standing right there, looking all tall and handsome. And there's old Benjamin Franklin. A lot of people wonder, why didn't he become president? He was like 82 right then. He could barely hear. So what was their goal? The goal of the convention was to create a strong fiscal, meaning like taxing spending, and military state while simultaneously protecting our individual liberties. There's that topic I brought up at the very beginning. How do we balance order with liberty? Do we give the government lots of power, or do we let the people have lots of power? They said, well, we need to have both. So some of the protections they had in the articles in the new Constitution. So the preamble, the we the people in order to form a more perfect union, which is not a good version of that song at all. It's just the purpose of the government, but the meat and potatoes of the Constitution are the articles. It sets up the government. The articles in the Constitution are not the Articles of Confederation. That's a totally separate document. The articles in the Constitution are a set of structures for the government we have today. So some protections they gave, some liberties they gave us in the articles, this is before you get to the amendments, freedom of speech, stuff like that, are here. They provided for a writ of habeas corpus, which is the right of people detained by the government to know the charges against them. So you get the piece of paper to say, okay, these are being brought against you before you actually get detained. That was suspended once. Does anyone know who suspended it? Thinking like, oh, it must be some bad guy. It was Abraham Lincoln. He suspended it in the name of war and crisis. They also protected with a bills of attainder, which is when the legislature declares someone guilty without a trial. You can't do that. And ex post facto laws punishing people for acts that were not crimes at the time they committed them. So if you walked outside today and you held an American flag on a Friday afternoon, and then on Monday they said it's illegal to carry American flags on Friday afternoon. You can't get arrested for doing it before the law even existed. Now, those were in the articles. The rest of the articles is basically structuring the government. We're not going to really get our individual freedoms until the amendments, but those amendments aren't going to pass until after this first part of the Constitution pass. So now they needed to figure out, okay, individual protections. Let's figure out the structure of the government. So the first thing they structured was the legislative branch. They wanted that to be Article 1. That's the first thing they talk about because they felt if anybody's going to have power, it's Congress because they're the most representative of the people. So there are different plans, different ideas of what to do. There's the Virginia plan that said there should be a 3-branch government. There we go. Or we should do a German 3. 3-branch government with a bicameral legislature. Bi means 2, so 2 House legislator. The larger states would get more representation because representation would be based on population. So large states love this idea. They're like, this is great. I love it. The lower house is directly elected by the people. The upper house is nominated by state legislatures. The small states like New Jersey, for instance, were like, this plan is garbage. It totally screws over the small states. So they wanted something different. They're like, one house, equal representation. And the big states were like, no, 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 no. So as you can see, there's their plans of the Virginia and New Jersey. Now, if you look over here, this is the plan that combined those 2 plans. Roger Sherman up in Connecticut, he's like, dude, why don't you guys combine these plans and we can all make everybody happy? The name of the game at the Constitutional Convention is compromise. There's a lot of compromise. And the first one was known as the Great or Connecticut Compromise, either or. He's like, why don't you just do this? Have a bicameral legislature where one house is based on representations based on population, and the other house is equal, 2 representatives per state. And it worked out perfect. So the lower house, they were directly elected and the representation was based on population. The upper house, each state gets 2 and they were selected by the state legislatures. So for a very long time, we never voted for senators. Actually, with the original Constitution, the only group that we actually got to vote for was the House of Representatives until the early 1900s. Then finally we got to vote for the Senate directly because the 17th Amendment allowed for that. We still don't directly elect the president, and we'll get to that later. They also created another compromise, the 3/5 compromise, that allowed slaves to be counted as 3/5 of a person when calculating the state's representation and taxation. And they wanted to end slavery. Even though we had a lot of slave owners, a lot of them understood that it was immoral and they didn't like it. But as Thomas Jefferson said at the time, it's like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't want to hold on to it, but you really don't want to let it go. And they were worried about letting it go so quickly, even though they knew it was morally wrong. So they thought, well, one way we can do that is restricting international slave trade. So they let it go on for another 20 years until 1808. Was there still slave trade? Absolutely. There was slave trade in the South domestically, but it wasn't international. That was illegal. So what about slavery in the Constitution? Well, I showed you where they talked about slavery, but it's definitely one of the greatest contradictions in American history. Why? Because we promote, as you can see with our political culture, we promote individual freedom and the pursuit of happiness and protection of rights. Obviously, those rights weren't protected in those that were bound to slavery. So it wasn't resolved at the Constitutional Convention. And here's the reason why. As much as they didn't, a lot of them, the majority of them wanted to get rid of it and knew it was wrong. They knew that the South would freak out if they got rid of slavery. And they're like, what's the priority right now? Ending slavery or creating a country that won't fall apart? And they chose the latter. And eventually it's going to come back to bite the country when it blows up into the Civil War. But that's one of the reasons why they kind of pushed it by the wayside, was because they were so concerned about getting the country formed and having a strong government. And they felt they could resolve that later, which, it only cost 600,000 American lives and, the inhumane practice of slavery. But, so this right here is showing you guys what the different percentage of slavery population was, and freed and slave population totals by states. And as you can see, the slave population is much higher in the South, and the free population is much higher in the North, but the overall population is higher in the North. and we're going to see that throughout the next several decades as well. So when we're taking the test and taking FRQs in here, there's four different types of FRQs. One's a long one, and then there's three short ones. So of the three short ones, you have ones that are just questions, just general questions, sometimes with a quote. One's based on Supreme Court cases, and one's based on like a quantitative graph. So you'll see a lot of questions that'll look like this. All right, so I'm going to skip this for now. You guys did good today. Have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later.